When May 13 happened, I was 18 years old. Many people will be wondering what year that was. You'll be excused if you can't get the figures right, because the government, you'll find later on, can't get figures very well right either. When it happened, I was a teacher in my school, but the years of terror that we grew up with, when I was young, we just survived the Japanese occupation, and the stories of terror and the atrocities, especially against the Chinese in this country, was quite chilling. And also in Batu Pahat, where I come from, in 1945, there was already a so-called race riot. In fact, there were some extremist Malay groups that were killing Chinese then. So these were the stories of terror and the legacy of fear that we grew up with. But before long, as I grew up, during my childhood and in my teenage years, Malayan society at that time was much more harmonious than it is today, than after the post-1969 period. It's become a bit cliched now, but we all could social mingle quite easily, in and out of each other's houses, Malays, Indians, or Chinese. Festivals, we do not. Nowadays, you need to be invited to festivals, to people's houses for festivals. During that time, you would just go on your bicycle and you visit your Malay, Chinese, Indian friends at the respective festivals. So, and we would go into Malay kampongs, Indian villages, etc., with no problems at all. And as we grew up, things began to change. Although the post-colonial society at that time wasn't perfect, there were the grievances amongst the farmers, especially in the north and the east coast. Grievances amongst the workers in the factories and mines, etc. By and large, in kampongs, in communities throughout the country, Malays, Indians, and Chinese could coexist quite well. But all that began to change in 1969. And when it happened, I'll give you a quick image of what society was like at that time, in terms of the social mixing that was around. And when May 13 happened, I was a teacher in my school. And when we first heard the news about May 13 in Kuala Lumpur, the killings, etc., it sent a chilling kind of reminder of what the stories I'd been told about the Japanese occupation, about the so-called riots in 1945 in Batu Pahat. My siblings, my cousins, etc., a lot of them were at Malayan University at that time. My brother-in-law was a professor of medicine in University Hospital. My brother was a medical student. I had cousins, brothers, etc., in other faculties. And especially the doctors saw what was going on in hospitals, the bodies that were brought out. In fact, this very morning, I was reading the memoirs of Anthony Reid. Bless his soul, he just died, I think, 2 days ago. Accounts of Anthony Reid confirm those stories. And apart from the fact that a majority of the corpses were Chinese, they had been tarred to hide their ethnicity. And also because many of them were not just killed by parang slashings, but by bullets fired by the army. So this was the kind of stories that we heard when we I was in my hometown school. And on the way to preparing for this talk, I went on DeepSeek and ChatGPT and said, "Can you give me a quote that shows the trauma of May 30?" And this is what he gave me. He said, "Imagine waking up to the sound of sirens, your neighborhood shrouded in smoke and fear replacing the comfort of home. On May 13, 1969, that nightmare became reality for thousands of Malaysians. The streets of Kuala Lumpur became killing fields. The Chinese and Indians, hunted like animals, hid in terror as their homes burned and their loved ones were slaughtered. The trauma of that day would scar generations, a silent scream in the nation's memory. That kind of memory has lived through the years. And you'd be surprised that even after 50 years, on the 50th anniversary of May 13, when we held forums and other kind of exchanges at the Chinese Assembly Hall, we heard for the first time, after 50 years, stories of survivors. Somebody had survived when his house was burned, and 8 members of his family were burned. And he managed to survive because he leaped from the upper floor onto the drain downstairs. The story by quite a leader in the Chinese Assembly Hall here, who for the first time after 50 years, retold the story of the kind of PTSD memories of somebody being slashed as he's fled from the scene. So these are the horror stories of May 13. And this was only after 50 years when Sungai Buloh was earmarked for development that we came to know about these mass graves at Sungai Buloh. The mass graves of May 13. And can you imagine that 50 years and not many people knew about this? And if you look at these are the figures from the National Operation Council. 99 Chinese, 2 Indians, 2 Malays, total of 103. And those who have read the white paper on May 13 will know that the total number is 196 according to the government. To add those figures up, where are the missing 80 odd? We believe there are 12 in the Kubuhan Muslim in Bang and Gombak. So where is the missing 80s? These are questions that anybody who's interested in truth and reconciliation would be interested in. Well, that is some of the questions from the Sungai Buloh. And more recently, actually, there have been at least 3 films made of May 13 by very, very, very internationally known filmmakers who are Malaysians but now living in Taiwan. But last year we saw the launch of Chong Kit-on's Snow in Midsummer, a very poignant film, you know. Above anything else, it shows up the intergenerational trauma. And this also came out during the other films that were made about May 13. It's not just Malaysians being afraid of May 13. Malaysians being afraid of talking about May 13. It's even the families of the victims of May 13 have been afraid to go to Sungai Buloh. Can you believe that? And Chong Kit-on spent 10 years researching for his film. Every year on the anniversary of May 13, he would go there and see who he could find. And there'll be dribbles of people. Usually it happens for some reason. The women amongst the families of these victims who come to the cemetery. Not many, but they come, you know. And so from the film, it's a beautiful film we haven't seen. I think you can see it on YouTube. This is what happened with Kit-on's film. So after that, I was at the end of 1969. I was quite disillusioned about all that I'd lived. You know, the 18 years that I'd lived, and I decided to leave Malaysia to seek my fortune. At the time, I said, you know, with my bundle and my stick, and I went to London and worked for 3 years as a labourer. And I went to university in Manchester in 1972. Determined to find out the root causes of polarization in Malaysia, the root causes of May 13. I did my bachelor's and master's in economics and social studies, even though I had done my A-levels in science. And I did my PhD in sociology in Manchester University with a scholarship. And my thesis was class and communalism in Malaysia, subsequently published by Z Press under an assumed name. But never mind, the thesis is now chapter 1 to 8 in my new book called Racism and Racial Discrimination in Malaysia. And in this is the context of what the so-called ethnic relations in Malaysia is all about. And that was my problem, my hypothesis of my thesis. I was determined to find out. And at the time when I was doing my thesis, I did some work at the Kew Gardens Public Records Office, which is now called the British National Archives. Because at that time, in 1978, the documents of 1948 of the emergency in Malaya had just been declassified. So I had my training of going to the Kew Gardens to look at those documents. But at that time, remember, in 1978, I was just a 20-something, like many of you here. And I already formulated my hypothesis, which was that the May 13 so-called riots was actually a coup d'etat by, at that time, the emergent state capitalist class, the people who were in charge of the bureaucracy, the civil service, the armed forces, etc. And they were impatient to get rid of the Tunku, who represented the aristocratic class. That was my thesis, and that was my thesis of 1978. So it became a question of, is it race or is it class? And at university, there are many, if you're in social science, you know that there are many theories. Many social scientists like to talk about pluralism, as if ethnic conflict is a natural development of societies where there are different, diverse ethnic communities. To me, it sounded very, very commonplace, and I preferred the class analysis that looks at society, the structure of society, and the way in which economic systems are shaped by the different hierarchies in society. And so that was how I went about my work. And the question of racism was a very big. When I was in England, I took part in many anti-racist struggles. But racism and then looking at something in terms of race reminded me of Hitler and his Mein Kampf. And if you look at you read Mahathir's Malay Dilemma, he also looks at it from a race point of view. And recently I read my memoirs was called Malaysian Dilemma. Whether you look at something in a racist way, you can see in today's world the way in which Israel is targeting Palestinians in Gaza in a racist ideology. With an apartheid policy in the occupied Gaza and the West Bank. So many people in this country can see the atrocities of the Israelis in Gaza, can see the injustice of the sufferings of the Palestinians. I hope they can also see it in this country. So looking at my thesis again, it is not as if it was my thesis. Many people saw that it was a political putsch, including the Tunku. And in 2002, my good friend, who was also Joe Kukata's father, K. Das, who was the official biographer of the Tunku, had interviewed the Tunku, and unfortunately he passed away in the 90s. And the family authorized me to publish these tapes. And in the tapes, you can hear the Tunku talking like that. Harun was one of them. Harun, Mahathir, Ghazali, Shafi'i, all there ready to get rid of him. So it's not just me, it was a Tunku. There was also a very prominent past intellectual at that time. I don't know what's happened to him actually, dear Subki Latif. Okay. And he also said the same in the Southeast Asian Studies, FS. But there was also Said Zahari, another intellectual who looks at our societal issues from a class point of view. And you know where he was to get his insight into May 13? He was in a prison cell in the Singapore prisons under the ISA. And he wrote this poem about May 13, in which you can see that he could see the hidden hands behind May 13. Okay? And that when I went on to publish my May 13 book in 2007 when I was the principal of New Era College, and I took some annual leave to go and look up the declassified documents on May 13 after 1969. This time it was principally about May 13, and my thesis was again that it was the emergent state capitalist class that had ousted the Tunku, and I analyzed the kind of alliance formula, which is more like a racial formula at independence, but the documents that I'd seen, you can see it from the foreign journalists, you can see it from the confidential memorandum by the different high commissions, embassies in this country. So they proved my point as well. And then as a result of May 13, you find that it had some very important results for the country, one of which was authoritarianism. And this is my wife Anne's thesis on authoritarianism and populism in Malaysia. The result of authoritarianism was, of course, the amendment to the ISA, the amendment to AUKU. Students will not be interested to know about the amendments to AUKU, etc. And I proved to be another victim of this authoritarianism when Mahathir launched his Operation Lalang in 1987. And when you talk about the impact of May 13, again, the Tunku was quite perceptive at that time. He says, for the Prime Minister, meaning Mahathir, to repeat the story of violence, he said it was a bit like telling ghost stories to children. So, and that is the important thing about May 13 as well. It wasn't just a real occurrence of terror and killings, etc. It also had to serve a purpose for the future post 1969, and through the years, the ruling party has always threatened that we will unleash another May 13 if. We saw it in 1987, the Tunku, remember? We saw it in 1990 when I stood for elections in Petaling, Jaya. The newspapers, the television, you know what, the Barisan Nasional at that time, the election propaganda at that time was pictures of May 13. On television, in the printed media. 1999, Suu Kyi, remember, when the Chinese associations came out with an election demand, the UMNO youth went to the Chinese Assembly Hall and threatened to burn down the Selangor Chinese Assembly Hall if they did not take back their demands. 2001, Kampung Medan is very important. Kampung Medan in 2001 was another May 13, albeit on a smaller scale. And this time the victims were Indians in Kampung Medan. 6 people were killed and about 90 were injured. 2008, when Barisan Nasional lost in Penang, they threatened, UMNO threatened that you don't want another May 13. 2014, Muhyiddin had another warning about May 13. And 2019, remember, this was in almost a new government. They warned that if you ratify the International Convention for the Eradication of Racial Discrimination, there will be May 13. Do you know how many countries in this world have ratified ICRD? But over 170 out of 190-something countries in the world. So what are the key insights I would like to leave you with and the call to action? Like, seek truth from facts. It seems very simple, but you'll be surprised people don't look at facts nowadays. BBC and CNN stopped looking at facts about Gaza for months, before they had to reluctantly acknowledge that there was genocide in Gaza. So we call for the declassification of the documents. When I was detained under the ISA, the special branch in the interrogation always said, do you think your academics are so clever? We, Special Branch, in our library, in our archives, we've got more information and books than you could ever dream of. And they are right. The Special Branch has got all kinds of information about May 13 and every other events in Malaysian history. Speak truth to power. I hope young people will learn to be able to speak truth to power, never be afraid to speak. And it is time we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in this country on May 13, just as they did in South Africa, just as they did in Rwanda, when they went through even worse atrocities and legacies of fear. And it is not time that we had class-based policies rather than race-based policies. I don't see. We have sent so many scholars to Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard, etc., but they come back and nobody seems to know how to make any policies that is not race-based. Can you imagine that? How many countries in this world today are making policies based on race? You can count on the fingers of your hand. And if you do not ratify the ICERD, I think we will remain among the pariah states of this world. ICC is just as important. As you know, Netanyahu, who has escaped to Greece today, to escape being retaliated against by the Iranians, he is wanted by the Hague Court for the atrocities he has committed in Gaza. We need multi-ethnic institutions. One of the most important ones is to have a rapid deployment force, multi-ethnic force. Especially, for example, the nearest example is Kampung Medan. Kampung Medan, it took 6 days to keep order in Kampung Medan. Can you imagine how small Kampung Medan is? When I was the MP for Petaling, Jaya, Kampung Medan is just one small enclave in Petaling, Jaya. It takes 6 days to keep order there. You know how many minutes it took for the government, the police to stop the Kesas Highway demonstration of thousands? 20 minutes. Do you know how long it took for them to stop the violence on May 13? May 13, order was only restored in July and August. How many months is that? 2 months at least. Does it take that long? And this is the Malaysian police and armed forces that had defeated the communist insurrection from 1948 and 1990. They have been trained. The Americans wanted the help of the Malaysian armed forces and the psychological warfare people. So I leave you, I think, with just this exhortation that we should continue the work of education. Young people especially, organize. You need to organize before we can do anything in this country. And we work for the future. For as we know, the famous quotation by Santayana, if we do not confront the lessons of the past, we're not going to be able to march into the future. And on this note, I take the opportunity to advertise my forthcoming book, which come out on Friday next week, called Does Malaysia Have a Future? Another food for thought. I thank you very much.